الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد حبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Tuhfa al-Saniyya, Sharh al-Ajrumiyya, in the commentary of the Ajrumiyya by Shaykh Faraz, we began by looking at the importance of the Arabic language and the science of grammar, and we read through the author's opening himself and his muqaddimat, his introductory investigations, right? Where he gives a definition of nahu and its subject and its fruit or benefit, and the ruling of learning grammar. And then he began by defining kalam. Now, why did he define kalam rather than defining the kalima?
Because kalam is the unit of investigation for nahu, whereas kalima is the unit of investigation for sarf.
Good. Because kalam is what they call al-maqsudu bil-dhat. And that is what is in itself sought in grammar, the unit of investigation. Right? That is what is, what does the grammarian look at? The nahwi, the scholar of nahwi, looks at sound sentences. The scholar of sarf looks at words, individual words and their forms. So we looked at that. And we looked at the definition of kalam, and that's of course an absolutely required definition. He defines kalam in many parts, right? And this is part of the educational purpose of the author. If you look at some other works, you'll find briefer definitions of kalam. Why? Because kalam, complete speech, you could just define it as qawlun mufid. Qawlun mufid. It's qawl, it's statements that convey a full meaning. That's briefer. But while that's briefer, it is less clear for the student. Whereas you tell the students, okay, it's lafz, it's words that are murakkab, that come together, that convey a complete meaning. This mufid, according to the rules of the Arabic language, this, going step by step, conveys a full, that helps the student to think through step by step. So brevity is not always good for the student, right? So that's why he defines it in that way. And we saw the definitions of each of these constituent terms of the definition. Al-kalamu huwa al-lafz wal-murakkab wal-mufidu bil-wada'. That's one of the mahasin, one of the praiseworthy components of Shaykh Faraz's work, that he gives definitions for the key terms. So it's that lafz, for example, he gives a definition for it, right? اللفظ is الصوت المشتمل على بعض الحروف الهجائية, right? المركب أن يكون مؤلفا من كلمتين فأكثر, made up of 2 or more letters. المفيد, right? أن يحسن سكوت المتكلم عليه, right? So each of these components in your notes, those are critical parts to the definition, right? And he has some very straightforward questions at the end of that section. By now, those of you attended last week should have written out. So you should take keynotes related to the section and then answer the question, and you'll find if you take clear notes, you'll have taken care of the section. So today we'll look at it's saying وَأَقْسَامُهُ ثَلَاثَةٌ. Okay? The subheadings are not properly from the text itself. They're from, some of the subheadings are introduced by the commentator. Right here, أنواع الكلام. This is from the commentator. Right? قال رحمه الله تعالى وأقسامه ثلاثة اسم وفعل وحرف جاء لمعنى. أقسامه أي أقسام الكلام. The categories of speech are three. The ism, the fi'l, and the harf that comes to indicate meanings in other than it. Now here there is an investigation, which we won't be breaking into, that what kind of classification is this? Right? Because aqsam, right? When the parts of something, right, are different types. So for example, this table, what is this table made up of? Right? It has a top, it has these legs. What else does the table have? It has a bunch of screws, some rubber stoppers. Okay? So these are those various elements: the top, the screws, the legs. Those are parts. Right? So the table is a whole that is made up of parts. Now, if you took the legs away, would just the top be called table? No. Okay. So this is one type of division of something. One division, and this is called the kul and the juz. Right? You have a whole and you have its parts. Now, can you call the tabletop table without consideration of the other things? No. Can you call the legs, if you put the legs by the wall, could you call that table? No. Could you call the rubber stoppers table? People think you're nuts if you refer to it as table. Okay?
Should I say them?
Or if you want to take a chair.
Oh, no, it's not on the
So each of the component elements you can't call with the name of the whole. But there's another component, but when they come together, it's called a table. But now, today, one of the brothers traveled, right? So this is a category called human being, al-insan. Now, Anas, regardless of how you feel about it, is he insan? Yes. By the general criteria, right? He's insan. But now let's say Anas left. Can you call Anas insan? So there's a category called insan. Anas is insan, and Zayn is insan, and Zubaydah is insan, and Salma is insan. But if Anas survives, the other three all die, is something gone from insan? No. Okay? And that's another type of category. Okay? And that's called the kulli, right? And juz'i. The kulli, and the sign of the kulli, there's a category, and there are the components of that category. They're the particulars of that category. Right? And what's the difference? Each of the particulars you can refer to by the name of the category. So Anas is insan, and Zubaydah is insan, Zubayr is insan, Auntie Jamila is insan. But insan is not made up, is not the sum of the parts of these particulars. There's no set of particulars that make up the category called insan. So the reason the scholar, so those are two broad types of categories, right? Now, when you say aqsamuhu, its parts are three. Is speech A plus B plus C? The speech requires, like table, let's say it requires tabletop, legs, and bolts. Let's say there's three parts that make a table, like a simple table. Is there a table without the three parts? Let's say no. Okay? But does kalam require ism plus fi'l plus harf? No. Can you have kalam that just one of the categories? Which one? Just one category. Ism. The jumla ismiya is made up of the mubtada and the khabar. Where's the fi'l? It's not there. Did it need to be there? No. You said Zaydun jalisun. Where's the fi'l? Okay, let's leave jalisun. You know, there's a few aspects of jalisun if you did have them reviewing the awamil. Okay. Sometimes you can have two of them. Jalasa Zaydun. You have fi'l plus fa'l. Where's the harf? Right? So kalam is not a kull that is made up of each of these. But kalam is also not kulli and juz'i. Would you refer to an ism that the ism is kalam? No. By definition, right? Because kalam is lafzun murakkabun mufidu bil wada'. This is not, the ism is not kalam. The fi'l is not kalam. The harf certainly is not kalam. So how is it made up of these three? Okay. So the commentators of al-Ajrumiyya had a field day about this, but and Imam Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid points towards this in his discussion, which we'll see, but it's made up of the three insofar as speech, the constituent parts of speech are nothing but one of these three. Okay? That the component parts of speech don't go outside being one of these three. Okay? So it's like it's a circle around that speech does not go out of being made up of asma, af'al, and huruf. Okay? So that's how. So they asked that question. And the reason they opened that up is just to be, the seeker of knowledge always asks what, why. Okay? Why, you always try to understand, ماذا, what? What is this? Okay? And the what question is answered by definitions. Right? They ask, وَلِمَاذا? And why? And that's answered by what's called the ta'leel, the reasoning. Okay? They ask also, كيف? How? Right? And the how question is answered by the definition of something into its conditions and integrals and details, right? How? And then there's also questions related, some things relate to time. So you ask meta, when? So these are four of the fundamental, what they call the fundamental questions. ماذا, ولماذا, كيف, متى, what, why, how, when, and of course, the when doesn't always apply. Sometimes the how doesn't apply. the singular concept is not made up of any parts. So Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, you'll see, points to what we just discussed. Okay? He says, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, أقول الألفاظ التي كان العرب يستعملونها في كلامهم ونقلت إلينا عنهم فنحن نتكلم بها في محاوراتنا ودروسنا ونقرأها في كتبنا ونكتب بها إلى أهلينا وأصدقائنا لا يخلو واحد منها أن يكون واحدا من ثلاثة أشياء الاسم والفعل والحرف. That the words that the Arabs used to use in their speech and that have been transmitted to us such that we speak with them in our discourse, muhawaratina, in our discourse with each other, and in our lessons, and which we read in our books, and which we write in our, with them, meaning in our correspondence, for example, to our families and our friends. لا يخلو واحد, خلا يخلو is to be free of, right? To be free, right? To be empty of, right? So from that, you have the idea of the khalwa, the khala, that none of those words do not go outside of being one of three types, namely the ism, fi'l, and harf. Right? So pointing to what we talked about, right? And Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid does a lot of this, right? He summarizes a very technical discussion into a precise one. Right? But what I mentioned about something can be broken down to kull and kull. There's two types of relationship between a whole and between a general and particulars, kull and juz, where the kull is made up of its parts, like table and its component parts, or they say like the carpet, and the things the carpet's made of. You can't refer to the thread as carpet, and the kulli like insan, or say hayawan. Is the insan hayawan? Yes. Is the asad hayawan? Yes. Etc. Right? So that's the background of why he mentioned that. And then he goes through what is an ism, what is the fi'l, and what is the harf. And here, and I'm going to point towards it. I'd like you to compile this. For those of you who like it, and I wouldn't recommend reading it fully, but for those of you who have more exposure to the Arabic language, al-Ashmawi, also sometimes referred to as Ibn al-Ashmawi, as one of the most technical commentaries on the Ajrumiyya. But each of these three types of word, the ism, the fi'l, and the harf, he has 5 investigations regarding. That's useful because it gives us some background. If you take some effort and compile those, you'll find benefit, inshallah. And we'll try to put that together as a resource from al-Ashmawi. Now, he says, أما الاسم في اللغة فهو ما دل على مسمى. An ism in the Arabic language is that which points to the name. The ism is that which points to something named. The name is that which points to something that is named. ما دل على مسمى. And this is actually there are deep intellectual questions about what's the relationship between names and that which is named. It has theological implications. It has to do with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Imam Ghazali, if you like a headache, you look in Al-Badai's 1998, there's a whole chapter about the name, the naming, and the named. The name and the name, the relationship between the name and the named, and the act of naming. And there are many other related investigations. But at the end of it all, he says, none of this was really practically important, so let's talk about what is important. We've done a good, depending on the edition, 15 to 20 pages discussing that on the more spaced out editions. So there are aspects to it. Now, the ism is that which points to what is named. The ism, because it's very significant, what's the root meaning of in the Arabic language, right? Its root is from the ishtiqaq of ism is like where do words come from? Where do words come from? So there's two great schools of Arabic grammar, right? The Kufans and the Basras. Right? The Basrans, who won most of the grammatical argument. So these two towns in Iraq, Kufa and Basra. And ultimately, the Basrans won the grammatical battles on most things. And very often they're matters of judgment, but the Basrans held that word, that the derivation is from the masdar, is from the verbal noun, right? So the fi'l comes after. Right? The Basrans, the Kufans on the other, so the Kufans held, and this is the majority opinion, that the origin of meanings is the masdar. Everything else is derivative from that. And so, for example, you have, in Sharh we say, ضرب يضرب ضربا, right? In the forms, right? فهو ضارب وذاك مضروب, etc. But what comes first? ضرب or ضرب? They would say the masdar comes first. So, right? The verbal noun, because the masdar indicates مدل على معنى الحدث دون زمن وقوعه, which indicates the meaning of an act without indicating in itself, by its form, the time that it occurred. Okay? So, ضرب comes first, the fi'l is derivative from that, because the madi, right, ضرب is الضرب في الماضي فيما مضى من الزمان. And then يضرب is ضرب in the present or the future, etc. Right? The ضارب is شخص اتصف بالضرب. The ضارب, the ism fa'il, the verbal noun, is someone, is a person characterized by the masdar, which is ضرب, etc. Okay? And this madhab is much more clear and straightforward, as often the Basran thinking was, and it won. The Kufans said, and this is a weaker position, that the masdar is derived from actions, because things happen, actions happen, and then they're described. Because there's no darb, there's no hitting without it taking place. Tell me, where's a shape, a thing is something that happens. And what expresses happening? A fi'l. Right? Can you have a masdar of darb without darb taking place? Conceptually. But even when you conceive of it, you conceive of an action. Anyways, and that's a back and forth, but the Basra is one, right? That the source of words are the masdars, right? So according to So I'll resist the urge to go into these 5 investigations, although it's tempting. It's meaning in the language and in usage. Number 2 is what's the grammatical ruling of it. The third is what it is derived from. Number 4 is its categories, and the 5th is its signs. And most of these are covered, but these are 5 investigations related to the ism, the fi'l, and the harf. So you guys will make us a printable PDF of these 5 from Ashmawi. But usefully, its derivation, according to the Basrans, the ism is from sumu, which is al-ulu, which is highness. Because al-ismu yasmu bihi musammahu, right? The ism is from sumu, from exaltedness, because you're from the lowliness of being unidentified to the elevation of being identified, from sumu, seen mean well, right? The Kufans differed even on the derivation. The Kufan said the ism is from sima, seen mean, sima, which is a sima is a alama, a sign, because the ism is a sign of what it is, of the musamma, of the name. Okay? Well, that's just the reason I'm mentioning this is because words go back to a root sense, and understanding the sense of that root is the key to understanding all the derivative forms. Okay. الاسم في اللغة فهو ما دل على مسمى, is that which indicates something named. وفي اصطلاح النحويين, and according to the istilah, the conventional usage of the grammarians, and you can say nahwiyun or you can say nuhat, and both are used, and they argued which one was better. Nahwiyin survived. Kalimatun, right? And istilah, of course, what form is it for those who surf or suffer? Istalaha, what pattern is this? Ifta'ala, but because it has a heavy letter, which is the sad, instead of ifta'ala, the ta becomes a ta. Right? So it's istalaha, it would have been istal, it's hard. Istalaha, it'd be very unnatural to say it, but it's the ifta'ala pattern from sulh. And sulh is when you come to agreement, typically after not having been in agreement. Right? So sulh, right, is being in a state of agreement. Istalaha is to engage in the meaning of the root. They came to agreement. Right? So this is their customary, this is their conventional use. According to the convention or the customary use of the grammarians, an ism is كلمة دلت على معنى في نفسها ولم تقترن بزمان, and some of the grammarians put وضعا, by its form. Okay. An ism is كلمة دلت على معنى في نفسها. It's a word that indicates a meaning in of itself and is not connected with time in its form, because some, as opposed to in its meaning, because al-Rabi'a, does it point to time? Spring. Yes, it refers to a certain time of year, but it's an ism. Al-Dhuhr, Is it an ism or a fi'l? It's an ism. But it indicates the meaning of as-sabahu, al-masa. It indicates a meaning related, but the meaning indicates time, not its structural form. Okay? As you know, as-sabah, but if you say asbaha zaydun marida. Okay? Asbaha ay dakhala fi as-sabah, right? Zayd woke up, or literally began the morning sick. Asbaha or amsa. Right? Right? And but that, how does it indicate the meaning of there? It's a fi'l because its form indicates time. Right? So we'll look at what distinguishes ism the fi'l in terms of the structure. Okay? So ولم يقترن بزمان وضعا. That's why they put this extra qualifier of وضعا, right? To distinguish those words whose meaning is time related. الصباح, المساء, بكرة, أصيلة, لكن القرآن بكرة وأصيلة, those refer to times of the day. That's all the prayer times. عشاء. Okay, نحو محمد وعلي ورجل وجمل ونهر وتفاحة وليمونة وعصا. Okay? So these different words. Jamal is a camel, Nahar is a river, Tufaha is an apple, Laymuna is a lemon, Asa is a stick. Very interesting, it's from the same root as it's related to what? Ma'asiyah. Why it's related. Okay. فكل واحد من هذه الألفاظ. So each one of these words يدل على معنى أي في نفسه. For each of these words indicate a meaning in of itself. وليس الزمان داخلا في معناه. Right? And time does not enter into its meaning. فيكون اسما. Right? So he simplifies it a little bit. Right? So an ism has two components, two sides. An ism indicates a meaning unconnected in its structural form. Right? Unconnected in its structural form to time. As opposed to the fi'l. The fi'l indicates a meaning, and in its form, it's connected to one of three times: past, present, or future. So he tells us, أما الفعل فهو في اللغة الحدث. An action in the Arabic language refers to al-hadath, something happening. So it's broader. وفي اصطلاح النحويين كلمة دلت على معنى في نفسها واقترنت بأحد الأزمنة الثلاثة التي هي الماضي والحال والمستقبل. So كلمة دلت على معنى في نفسها. Words that indicate meaning in of themselves, connected in its form واقترنت بأحد الأزمنة الثلاثة, with one of the three times, الماضي, past, the present, الحال, والمستقبل, and the future, وضعا, again, in the structure of the word. Okay? So in that sense, for example, okay, ركب زيد الفرس أمس. ركب زيد الفرس أمس. Which word here is connected to time?
ركب.
The trick question. So rakiba is connected to time. How? Because in its form, in its wada, the type of rakiba is a fi'l madi. It indicates a past. Rakiba yarkabu rukuban, right? Right? So that's the indicate the rakiba, which means to ride. It does not convey the meaning of time in its meaning, but indicates it in what? In its wada, in the type of word it is. But it was deliberately a trick question, because what is the other word that indicates time? Ams. But how does ams indicate time? In its ma'na, not in its. Ams means yesterday. Amsu, yesterday. So there, so أمس هل تدل أمس على الزمان؟ نعم تدل على الزمان معنى لا وضعا. It indicates time in its meaning, not in its form, in its structure. Right? So that just in a simple. So he simplified it a little more than, but we don't want to quibble with the author. Right? So he says نحو كتب, such as كتب, he wrote. فإنه كلمة دالة على معنى وهو الكتابة وهذا المعنى مقترن بالزمان الماضي, because the word كتب indicates a meaning, which is كتابة. كتب يكتب كتابة, the masdar, right? This is sort of, we're being basran here, right? الكتابة وهذا المعنى مقترن بالزمن الماضي, and this meaning مقترن اقترن افتعل from قرن, which is to bring two things together. It's connected with the past, وضعا, right? In its form. ونحو يكتب فإنه دال على معنى, because يكتب indicates a meaning, وهو الكتابة أيضا, وهذا المعنى مقترن بالزمان الحاضر, and it's related to the present. نحو أكتب ونحو أكتب, and like write, which is the فعل أمر. فإنه كلمة دالة على معنى وهو الكتابة أيضا, وهذا المعنى مقترن بزمان المستقبل الذي بعد الزمان من التكلم, right? Which is connected to the future, which is the time after the present. ومثل هذه الألفاظ نصر وينصر وانصر, right? To give victory. فهم ويفهم وافهم, وعلم يعلم واعلم, وجلس يجلس واجلس, وضرب يضرب واضرب. Now here, a practical thing, even Arabs are often very lax when it comes to their own language, even educated Arabs, is keep a dictionary handy. And don't assume that you know the form of words. Right? So I encourage everybody to have a good copy of Mukhtar al-Sihah. Okay? It's not a useful dictionary as a dictionary for a non-Arab necessarily. Okay? Words that you don't know, they'll often, you just won't give a definition. Or somebody said, ma'aruf. I'm like, I wanted to get into arguments with you all. Because if I knew it, I would look at you, right? What's wrong with you? But I was really, I asked Shaykh Rahman Khassa, Sayyidi, why have you recommended this dictionary? And I've taken upon myself not to use Hans Weir, except for necessity when I was totally lost. But where it's very useful because he tells you what form nasara, what form the word is. Right? So you see here, it could be nasara yansuru, it could be fahima yafhamu, right? Alima ya'lamu, right? So to get the forms of words, and even common day-to-day words, very often You need, generally, usage is based on ease. Right? Usage is based on ease. People say things in the easiest way possible. Right? A grammarian would dejectedly say that if people are able to get away with it, they would use emojis and shortcuts in typing. The emojis are easy. You say sure, no problem, you just send a thumbs up. That conveys meaning easily. So language, yeah, so you see this tasheel happens in Amiyya. But, so sometimes something's heavy to pronounce, they'll pronounce it in a different way. It comes with proper names of cities. Is it Mosul or Mosul? And people pronounce it in one way, but properly it will be another. Is it Himmis or Hummus? Is it a Himmisa? Right? So a lot of words. Sometimes there's multiple uses. Ruz. How do you pronounce Ruz? There's actually not one way, there's multiple ways. Or frog. What's the word for frog in Arabic? What? There's actually multiple ways you can say it. Is it dif-di' or dif-da' or a bunch of other interesting permutations, right? So keep a dictionary handy, right? For words. والفعل على ثلاثة أنواع ماض ومضارع وأمر. And the fi'l is one of three types: the past, the present or continuous, and the command, right? The amr. فالماضي, so الفعل الماضي ما دل على حدث وقع في الزمان الذي قبل زمان المتكلم or زمان التكلم, right? So the ماضي refers to that, to a حدث. So this is applying the general definition, right? كلمة دلت على حدث واقترن بأحد الأزمنة الثلاث, right? So that's like the فعل. The ماضي is في زمن, يعني في الزمان الذي قبل التكلم. Something happened before the speech. نحو كتب وفهم, he wrote, he understood. وخرج, he left. وسمع, he heard. وأبصر, he saw something. وتكلم, he spoke. واستغفر, he sought forgiveness. واشترك, and he partnered, he shared in something. And these are all past. والمضارع ما دل على حدث يقع في زمان التكلم أو بعده. The مضارع is something that indicates an occurrence that happens at the time of speaking or after it. It's used for the present or the continuous, that which is ongoing. يكتب, he writes. يفهم ويخرج ويسمع وينصر ويتكلم ويستغفر ويشترك. And of course, remembering the sarf forms helps, right? He uses simple forms in most of these, right? Here, right? But يتكلم is from what? تفعل. تكلم يتكلم, right? تفعل is from the تفعل pattern, which indicates certain meanings. يستغفر, he seeks forgiveness. The استفعل pattern conveys طلب, but it conveys طلب primarily, but it also can indicate حصول. الحصول بعد الطلب is that which is attained, right? يشترك, what form is this? افتعل, right? افتعل, just to engage in something, right? أما الحرف, so that's what he tells us about ism and the fi'l. أما الحرف, right? فهو في اللغة الطرف, right? حرف means the end of something, and طرف as opposed to طرف, which means just similar. It comes from, again, from the corner of something. The طرف is the corner of the eye, right? And there you can find in the they frequently here quote the lines of the poet who said, أشارت بطرف العين خيفة أهلها. She indicated with the corner of her eye out of fear of her people. Okay? Which is quite, there's a context to most of this kind of poetry. Okay? So, طرف, which means the edge of something. Okay? The edge of something. وفي اصطلاح النحاة, in the usage of the grammarians, كلمة دلت على معنى في غيرها. It's a word that indicates a meaning in other than it. So the huruf are instruments of meaning. They bring out meaning in other than it. But on their own, they don't stand alone in conveying a meaning. Right? So this is a question, right? There's someone thinking simplicity. Does the ism indicate a meaning? Yeah, it indicates the musamma. Does the fi'l indicate a meaning? Yes. Does the harf indicate a meaning? Does the harf indicate a meaning? When we talk about the harf according to Nuhat, we're not just talking about like a letter, we're talking about the harf according to the grammarians. The harf can also mean just a letter. We're talking about we call it huruf al-ma'ani, right? Does it indicate a meaning? It doesn't indicate a meaning in itself, but it brings out a meaning in something else. It's one of the very useful things that the commentaries mentioned when we look at the signs of the ism. We go through, so min has a meaning of ibtida, right? And there's secondary meanings of the min. The ila has the meaning of end, and it has other meanings as well. Ala has the sense of al-isti'la, on one thing being above another. But ala on its own does not, as the harf ala, because also ala ya'lu, which is a fi'l, right? Ala on its own, the harf ala, does not indicate a meaning on its own. But it connotes a meaning that is brought out in other than it. And that's why هل تدل على معنى? It's a composite answer, right? إن الحرف لا يدل على معنى في نفسه بل في غيره. Right? Right? الكلمة دلت على معنى في غيرها. Right? Right? And so it explains نحو من فإن هذا اللفظ كلمة دلت على معنى وهو الابتداء. Beginning. ابتدأ يبتدئ ابتداء افتعل بدء is beginning. الابتداء is engaging in beginning. Okay? افتعل pattern is the مصدر. وهذا المعنى لا يتم حتى تضم إلى هذه الكلمة غيرها. And this meaning is not complete. لا يتم until if you bring together with this letter the min another letter. فتقول مثلا ذهبت من البيت. I left from the house. من البيت مثلا. So it indicates that أن ابتداء الذهاب it indicates that the beginning of the leaving was, or the beginning point of the leaving was the house. Okay? مثلا أمثلة للاسم. Yes, he gives examples, right? كتاب, قلم, دوات, كراسة. كراسة is what?
Chairs.
What's a kurrasa? These are opportunities to pick up. What's a kurrasa? It's a notebook. Right? Of course, what's the relationship between a kurrasa and a kursi? very interesting, right? That's why Arabic is so fascinating. There's a relationship. Don't just guess it. Opening the dictionary. Jarida. What's a jarida? What's a jarida? Can the Arab help us?
Yeah, newspaper.
Yeah. Now, jaridatun, right? Now, jarid refers to a bunch of other. The root meaning, you have jarrada, is to put something separate to separate it. But you also have jarid, which is like palm front, for example, right? The long leaves of something. Now, why is a jarida, in modern Arabic particularly, refers to like the sheets of a newspaper, is related to the meaning for spiritual divestment, tajreed, from the same root. Now how? That's up to you to look up, but it's a worthy investment to look up. Khalil. Khalil is a close friend, close intimate friend. Salih, righteous. Like from same from istilah and salih come from the same root. Because salih is someone who's made good their action. Man saluha amaluhu. Right? And they define as-salih man adda haqq Allahi wa haqq ibadihi biqadr al-mustata'. The one who fulfills the rights of Allah and the rights of his servant to the extent possible. Or biqadr al-usayh. Imran or Umran. Imran's name of person, or Umran refers to that which is built up, like, or it can be referred to civilization, etc. Waraqa, a piece of paper. Sab'un, a wild animal. Now, why sab'a and sab'a are from the same root is, again, point of fascination. Himar, right? Right? Donkey. Now, is the relation between donkey and red, ahmar, something to think about. Dhib. What's a dhib? It's a wild animal. أكله الذئب. What was it? A wolf. Now, I get animal names wrong because wolf, fox, etc. Right? Fahad. What's a fahad? Hyena. In one madhab, hyenas are edible. The Shafi'is allow the eating of certain types of hyenas. There's Shaykh Musa has a lot of discussion on it. Namir. What is a namir?
Tiger.
The tiger. Laymuna, lemon. Burtuqala, right? Which is an orange. Now, what came first? Portugal or Burtuqala? Burtuqal. Is it an original word from Arabic or is it Arabized? Don't rush. Right? Don't take your knowledge just from. So Portugal is from the Arabic word for orange. But where's the Arabic word for orange from? Right? Ummathra. Right? Narjisa. Narjis. What is Narjis? In Urdu you say Narjis. Type of? What type? What? Nargis is very good. Nargis is actually Arabized. Nargis is actually Arabized from Persian. What is Nargis? It's a type of plant. Right? Wardatu. arose. Okay. هؤلاء, these, أنتم. Okay, so these are different types of words. And you put a different mixture. Some are Arabized words, right? Like Narjis. Many flower names are from Persian, actually. They're Arabized. أمثلة للفعل سافر يسافر سافر, right? From traveling, past, ماضي مضارع أمر. قال يقول قل. أمن يأمن إيمان. Sorry, no. إيمان. Right? أمن يأمن إيمان. Now that's not, right? Be safe, right? But again, we have one designated Arab here right now. Have you ever heard anyone commanding another say Iman? No, it's not used. That's why use phrases as building blocks. Because something, it may be true, but language is based on usage. No one, like you read it in Shakespeare, right? Doesn't mean you can speak it in the mall, right? رضي يرضى إرضى. صدق يصدق أصدق. اجتهد يجتهد اجتهد. Right? So صدق from being true, اجتهد from striving, is the if'ala pattern. Right? And juhud is to give one's, to exert active effort, right? Or to give one's utmost. Right? استغفر يستغفر استغفر. Right? To seek forgiveness. أمثلة للحرف من إلى عن على إلا لكن إن أن بلى بل قد سوف حتى لم لا لن لو لما لعل ما لات ليت إن ثم and أو. So these are, and he gives questions, and these would be good to do, in terms of consolidating. ما هو الاسم؟ مثل للاسم. Give examples. ما هو الفعل? And this is very straightforward. Now what's more interesting are the signs of the ism. What are the signs of the ism? And this one would do well to diagram this whole, the whole section. This is the kalam, has 3 parts. This is the definitions of each, and what the commentator will put in. Okay? Of defining each of the subcomponents, right, which the commentator added. And then he'll tell us علامات الاسم. Okay? And a alama is that which distinguishes, it's a sign that distinguishes one thing from another. Okay? فالعلامة ما يميز الشيء عن غيره. A sign is that which distinguishes one thing from another. And if you see this, it indicates the thing that it's a sign of, as opposed to something else. So signs are not shared. Like a sign of an ism, if found, it indicates an ism rather than being a harf or being a fi'l or a harf. That's the sign. And he points to that in his definition. So let's see. It says فالاسم يعرف بالخفض والتنوين ودخول الألف واللام وحروف الخفض وهي من وإلى وعن وعلى وفي ورب والباء والكاف واللام. And then how do you read this? وحروف القسم or حروف القسم. But the asl is that you say الاسم يعرف ب, so it should be وحروف القسم. Okay? What did you memorize it as? حروف القسم. Okay? Okay? Because الاسم يعرف ب and everything after it is majroor. So, and of course, khafd is from the usage of the Kufans. And that's one of the intriguing things, is that Ibn al-Ajrumiyya, who's quite late in Islamic scholarship, right? But He uses some of the terms of the Kufans. And why does he do that? We don't really know. Some said because when he came to khafd, a jar is to drag. And dragging, what's the primary thing that you drag? Okay. The first thing that comes to mind when you say dragging, what would a man drag? Yeah, dragging feet, but no. And Allah does not look at one who drags their lower garment out of khuyala, out of haughtiness. So jar, in that sense, has a sense of haughtiness. Was khafd, to lower oneself, is what one does out of humility. واخفض جناحك لمن اتبعك من المؤمنين. And also, that's what one does. If acting with humility, that's what one does when one cares. From Surah Al-Isra. واخفض لهما جناح الذل من الرحمة. That's one. Some of the commentators say he uses it because Ibn al-Ajrumiyya, he's a person of spirituality. That's where the word comes from. In Berber or whatever. So he like khafd is humbling oneself. Okay? But Allah. But these are terms. And there's a general principle, لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح. There's no arguing about terminology. So let's say the khafd, if you want to call it a takassur instead. And you say, in this book, I'm going to use takassur for the khafd, for the jar, because the asl of it is that it is using a kasra. Can he object to you for using that term? No, if you define the term, then that's my terminology. Say, la mushaha. We cannot be stingy or argumentative about terminology. Al-ibra lil-ma'ani. But beware of using terms no one else uses, because you use terms no one else, and instead of calling it rafa, you call it tadammum. The usage of the dhamma. Because the asl in the rafa is dhamma. And instead of nasb, you call it tafattuh. Sure, but then someone comes to read your book, they'll be weirded out. Okay? So anyway, that's just something to keep in mind. فالاسم يعرف ينبأ by this. أقول قال رحمه الله أقول للاسم علامات يتميز عن أخويه الفعل والحرف بوجود واحدة منها أو قبولها. The ism has signs by which it is distinguished from its brethren, the fi'l and the harf. So here he implicitly gives us a definition of the alama. العلامة ما يتميز به شيء عن غيره. Okay? A sign is that one thing is distinguished from other than it. If one of these is found. Or if it accepts it. Right? So the thing doesn't have to be found. You can ask yourself the question, could we put a min before this? Or بِقَبُولِهَا. It accepts it. Right? So for example, if you say Zaydun, right? It's an ism. Now Zayd is it an ism or a fi'l? Well, we know it already, but it. Zayd on its own is not in a state of i'rab. Okay? The i'rab enters into kalam. There's no agent affecting it, it's Zayd. But can you say, okay, you say Zaydun, it accepts tanween. Therefore, it is an ism and could not be a harf. It couldn't be a fi'l or a harf because tanween only enters into the ism. وقد ذكر المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى من هذه العلامات 4 علامات, and he mentions 4 signs. وهي الخفض والتنوين, which is the state of خفض, which is jar, being in a state of jar, which in English they call what? The genitive case. والتنوين, like زيدون, ودخول الألف واللام, and the التعريف, ودخول حرف من حروف الخفض, or the entry of one of the حروف الخفض, which are, now the حروف القسم are a subset of the حروف الخفض. وهي, so the حروف القسم could either, there's what the reason in the matan could be read in 2 ways, right? الاسم يعرف بالخفض والتنوين ودخول الألف واللام وحروف الخفض. Sentence over. وهي, now if you consider this is a new starting point, the waw here is للاستئناف. The new starting point, min, hiya, and the rest are khabar. Each of them are in place of the khabar. Hiya, the mubtada, everything else is khabar. So in that sense, the min and ila and an, these are all multiple, it's khabar after khabar. So then you have wa, or the ma'tuf to it, right? In that sense, you have huruf al-qasam. So the huruf, wa huruf al-khafd, wa hiya, and then there's as if you put brackets, and there are these things. But within the brackets, the i'rab would be wa huruf al-qasam. It can be done both ways. It can be i'rabbed in both ways. Logically, the huruf al-qasam might be the more logical i'rab, but the more practical i'rab is khafd. And with modern Arabs, don't test their logic. Just go with the more plausible. Okay? That sometimes requires a bit of an ear. Just because Arabs can make as many mistakes they want, they still think that they're Arabs. You say something correct, but that's not how modern Arabs speak, they'll think that you're messing up. So, yeah. The sunnah is that a person does not humiliate himself. So, and ultimately, don't really care what they think, but just speak in proper Arabic. Right? So, أما الخفض في اللغة فهو في اللغة ضد الارتفاع. خفض in the Arabic language refers to the opposite of being elevated, being lowered. And this is one of the ways of defining something clearly, is to, like, if its opposite is more clearly known, it is the opposite of such. It says that تعرف الأمور بأضدادها. Matters are known by their opposites. That's one of the sound ways of defining something. But the condition of defining something by its opposite is that the opposite be more famous. Okay? So what's yin? Yin is the opposite of yang. Thank you very much. Now there are 2 things I don't know. I don't know yin and I don't know yang. Right? So you can't do that. وفي اصطلاح النحاة عبارة عن الكسرة التي يحدثها العامل أو ما ناب عنها. Right? So this is a good definition. Right? The khafd is the kasra that is caused by the agent. And we'll be looking at agents. The amil is those things that enter upon words or phrases that affect a change in their grammatical states. Right? The amil are what causes a change in the grammatical state of something. أو ما ناب عنها أي ما ناب عن what's the have going back to here? ما ناب عن الكسرة, that which takes the place of the kasra. Right? Right? So it's the kasra caused by the amil, or that which takes or that which is in the place of the kasra. Right? Which are what? Yeah. So there, we'll look at it. You know, there's ضوان ضم واو ألف نون فاتيح فتحة ألف كسرة ياء الحذف النون for the نصب and the خفض is كسر كسرة ياء and فتحة in the ممنوع من الصرف. Right? What we see that. So the fatha or that which takes its place. Now this goes back, there's a discussion here which we won't unpack. The grammarians differed. Is the i'rab lafzi or ma'nawi? So i'rab, like khafd, jar. Jar, is it a state indicated by the fatha, the kasra, by the kasra, by the kasra, the ya or the fatha? Right? Is the i'rab like jar? Rafa. Is it a state? That's what it's ma'nawi. It's a meaning indicated by these outward changes, or is it the change itself? Or is it lafzi? Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, this great master of the Arabic language, takes here, is clearly adopting the position that the i'rab is what? Is lafzi. What is khafd? The khafd is the kasra. Right? As opposed to, so this affects how you do i'rab of the sentence. So you say, kharaja zaydun min al-bayt. So if you just look at the min al-bayt part, min is a harf jar mabni ala sukun, right? وحرك بالفتح بالتقاء الساكن من البيت, right? البيت, how do you say? Is اسم مجرور بمن. And now there's two pathways for i'rab. You can either say it's مجرور بمن وجره كسرة ظاهرة في آخره, and its jar is the explicit kasra at its end. That's on the madhab of i'rab being lafzi, and that's sort of what he follows. Right? He's following here. That's a long argument amongst the grammarians. We don't need to get to the end of it. It's good to have these questions. Look for the answers yourself. The other madhab would be, say, and even some modern scholars prefer that way. They say, al-bayt, خرج زيد من البيت. البيت is اسم مجرور وعلامة جره كسرة ظاهرة في آخره. So jar is a state. The kasra indicates that state. And some people found that more satisfying, that these are grammatical states and there's multiple signs that are indicated. And it's a matter of classification, really. Right? And that's what one of the things the larger books do, they help the grammarians try to come up with an explanation. We right now look at the what of grammar. What is grammar? The intermediate level looks at why is it this way? Right? So, وذلك مثل كسرة الراء من بكر وعمر في نحو قولك مررت ببكر. Right? I passed by Bakr. Now, of course, properly speaking, if you just read the example, you say مررت ب. If you just read the statement, you say مررت ببكر, because you stop at a sukun. But the ulama say this in the general adab of the dars. If the example is in the last letter, then you say مررت ببكر. The ish istafat min al-mithal. Then what did I benefit from you reading it? Right, so there you would, if the example is dependent on saying the last letter, then one does the vowel mark on that. So مررت ببكر وقولك هذا كتاب عمر. فبكر وعمر اسمان لوجود الكسرة في أواخر كل واحدة منهما. So the fact that they take the kasra at the end, i.e. that they're in khafd, which equals jar, indicates that Zayd and Amr or Bakr and Amr are isms. وأما التنوين نون ينون تنوينا is a fa'ala pattern from the noon sound. And some birds are different. In nawwana, such and such bird, whichever one it was, right? Nawwana, the noon sound, is to engage in the noon sound. And that noon sound being produced, the masdar is tanween, right? فهو في اللغة التصويت. Right? So tanween in the Arabic language is to make a sound or to make a noon sound. Right? تقول نون الطائر أي صوت. You say that the bird made نون الطائر, it made a sound. Okay? Now, is it the noon sound or is it more general? That's a separate matter. وفي اصطلاح النحاة, in the usage of the grammarians, هو نون, again, things like this are significant, right? Right? هو نون ساكنة تتبع آخر الاسم لفظا وتفارقه خطا. Right? It's a silent noon that follows the end of an ism in pronunciation, but parts from it in writing, meaning that it is pronounced. So there's a noon pronounced at the end of the letter, but not written. But تفارقه خطا. You don't write a noon. Right? That's the definition. Now the reasoning for why it's not written as a letter, للاستغناء عنها بتكرار الشكلة عند الضبط بالقلم. Because of being free of need, استغناء, of writing a letter there by repeating the final vowel mark, the tikrar shakla of what the vowel mark is, عند الضبط بالقلم. And that's from the usage of the Arabs. The Arabs could have put Muhammadun with a noon if they wanted to. You went to that Uyghur restaurant, the Uyghur people, I'd love to have seen what they decided. So you know what? We're not going to write words in Arabic, and we're not going to write them in Persian. We're going to do our own way. So Abdul Rahman, because they pronounce Abdul Rahman, so it's written with an alif, Abdur Rahman, Abdur Rahman. It's like, looks like some, you have to pay attention, whoa. And the owner of this restaurant was showing us, and that's their right, that's their convention. And you go and say you're wrong? No, because that's their convention. And you can't write the Quran like that, because that, that is as revealed. But you're not speaking Quran, you're speaking human language, so you don't have to write abd in the way the Arabs write, right? So that's from the Arabs can be, their urf and the kitaba, and their wisdoms in it, of course. نحو محمد كاتب إيه صهل, and we'll see what إيه and صه are. The difference between صهي and صهل. And مسلمات, فاطمات, plural of Fatimas. And the reason they often mention things like Fatimat is because people, like in the subcontinent, sometimes in the same family, you have a girl named Fatima, another named Zahra, another named Batul. Right? Right? There's other names for Sayyida Fatima. It's all referring to Sayyida Fatima. Right? Old times, you'd have, within the same family, same group of kids, same similar, you have Fatima al-Kubra, Fatima al-Wusta, and Fatima al-Sughra. And not just Fatima, they have many other names, right? And you see that from the children of, say, many of the Sahaba, they had multiple children with the same name. Sometimes one died and they named the next one the same name. If it works, use it again. But sometimes they're alike at the same time. Right? And you can see that in the lineages of the Ahlul Bayt as well. Within the same set of siblings. So, Fatima, the Fatima. وَحِينَ إِذٍ and سَاعَةَ إِذٍ. سَاعَةَ إِذٍ, at the time of. That's not used that much in modern Arabic. حِينَ إِذٍ is used, but سَاعَةَ إِذٍ. Let's see, much of the Arab world will not be used in day-to-day Arabic, for sure. Okay? فهذه الكلمات كلها أسماء. These words are all اسم بدليل وجود التنوين في آخر كل كلمة منها. Because of the presence of tanween at the end of it. Because of the sound presence of tanween. Right? Because you can't just say جلس, جلس. No, that's just خطأ. Right? Right? We mean the sound presence of tanween. العلامة. Now, the tanween, right? He doesn't break it down. I don't know why I thought he did. But there are 4 types of tanween. Right? And that's a useful breakdown. You can find it in Shaykh Ali's commentary or in Ashmawi. Okay? So, some of the larger works, even for example, the commentary on the Mutammima, what's it called? Al-Kawakib al-Durriya mentioned there's 10 types of tanween, but there's four types of tanween. There's one type of tanween which is called tanween al-tamkeen. That's like the plain vanilla tamkeen, the plain vanilla tanween, which is the tanween that indicates that something is firmly established as being an ism. Makana is to be in a place. That's what the place you are is called makan. Right? It's to be settled. Tamkeen is to be firmly settled. Right? So, makkana, yumakkinu tamkeena. So, tanween tamkeen is like these examples, right? Like you say, kitabun indicates that the kitab is clearly an ism. Tanween al-tamkeen. There's also tanween al-tankir, the tanween that indicates indefiniteness. So there's some words that are mabni ala al-kasr at their endings. Right? They're ism though. So for example, sibawayhi. If you say ja'a sibawayhi, I say you're hallucinating. Right? Because they must have had tobacco in the pond, right? Yes, right? Ja'a sibawayhi, Sibawayhi himself came. Of course, how could he be correct in saying ja'a sibawayhi? If he's metaphorically referring to you as Sibawayhi came. Right? So you have this great scholar from Bantan, from the island of Java in modern day Indonesia, whose name is Sheikh Muhammad Nawawi al-Jawi. He calls himself Nawawi. Tafa'una. That Sheikh Nawawi has come. What you mean? Shaykh Muhammad Nawawi al-Jawi, or al-Bantani from Bantan, al-Jawi from Java, rahimahullah ta'ala. His books might be read more than Imam Nawawi's. There's so many Indonesians. He made this intention. He would write more books than Imam Nawawi and have to be more read than Imam Nawawi. And cumulatively, he wrote a lot more than Imam Nawawi. And his books, because he wrote on all the books of the Shafi'i school, and everything, so much of the classical madrasa curriculum. Anyway, so he said, Ja'a Sibawayhi means Sibawayhi himself came. But if you say Ja'a Sibawayhin, that's tanween of tankir. It makes it indefinite. You say a Sibawayh came. And there's many of these forms, there are many other letters, right? Right? Sahi indicates be silent. Sahin is be silent, is indefinite silence. And there's a difference in usage between them. You can tell us what's the difference between sahi and sahil next week. Right? That's tanween al-tankir. There's also the tanween al-tankir, tanween al-tankir. This tanween al-muqabala. Right? Right? And that's more of a reason that why is there tanween at the end of muslimat, for example. Right? And then fourth, there's tanween al-iwad. That's a fascinating tanween. And he gave examples. Hina idh, for example. So in the Quran, وَأَنْتُمْ حِينَئِذٍ تَنْظُرُونَ. Or from Surah Al-Zalzala, what does it say? إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةُ. That's right. It says, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا وَأَخْرَجَتِ الْأَرْضُ أَثْقَالَهَا وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها. So that's يومئذ, right? يومئذ. Now this يومئذ, this tanween is called tanween al-iwad. It substitutes for multiple sentence. Right? That's وأنتم, what is it? وأنتم حينئذ, and you then are looking. Now the حينئذ, at that time. So حينئذ, حين is at that time are looking. So at that time, and you at the time of إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها أخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها. Yeah. Right? وأنتم, what was it? أنتم حينئذ تنظرون. When all these things happen, right? Likewise, وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون, right? When the verses, what's before? كلا إذا بلغت الحلقوم. What? وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون. Right? When the soul reaches the hulqum, and you then, at that time, حينئذ بلغت الحلقوم تنظرون. So that tanween is a substitute for, can be substitute for multiple sentences, like in Surah Al-Zalzala, or one sentence, or words, or even one letter, like when there's fiqh, like qadin, right? Jarin, right? When you omit the ya at the end because of fiqh, right? Like in جاء القاضي, because it will be جاء القاضي, which is heavy. So let me say قاضٍ. جاء قاضي would be heavy, chopped it. Right? But that substitute, the قاضٍ, is عوض, it's a tanween, it's عوض عن الياء. It takes the place of the ya. So that's a tanween al-iwad. And these are discussed. Shaykh Ali goes through them if someone's interested. So there's 4 types of tanween. Okay. علامات الاسم. The third sign of the ism is دخول ال في أول الكلمة. And this al, which the grammarians differed on how to refer to it. Shaykh Imam Ibn Ajrum calls it دخول الألف واللام. But the grammarians said, if you want to be a stickler, الذي has an alif واللام. They didn't like that. Some put it, so دخول الألف واللام, some said دخول ال in this way. Others, I said, دخول التعريف, the definitive ال. Others call it دخول لام التعريف. So then they broke it down. The al are both of them of ta'rif, and that goes in, that gets, so there's discussion on what exactly causes the ta'rif. Right? So al, very frequently referred to as al ta'rif. Right? But part of the reason just to mention these, just like that, is to appreciate that there's a lot of rich discussion, but it's not just out of being pedantic, it's because they really strove to have precision in their thinking and in their discussions. Okay. Okay. And then, so he tells us في أول الكلمة, right? This is التعريف, right? نحو الرجل, الغلام, الفرس, الكتاب, البيت, المدرسة. فهذه الكلمات كلها أسماء. All these words are أسماء. Why? لدخول الألف واللام في أولها, because the entrance of the alif and lam at the beginning. العلامة الرابعة دخول حرف من حروف الخفض. Right? With the entrance of any of the حروف الخفض, نحو ذهبت من البيت إلى المدرسة. فكل من البيت والمدرسة اسم لدخول حرف الخفض عليهما والوجود ال في أولهما. Right? So he mentions, he put two signs together, right? ذهبت من البيت إلى المدرسة, right? But you could have it without the al, you could, right? And in a different kind of example, but it requires a little more takalluf, right? Because وحروف الخفض, right? Here min, and here he does a very useful thing, and this is very useful. Make a chart, and especially Shaykh Muhammad al-Hamid, something very nice he does is he gives us the primary meaning of the huruf al-khafd. That's very useful. He gives the primary meaning, but he points to the fact that it has many meanings. Right? So he said, وحروف الخفض هي من ولها معان. And this is an example of تنوين العوض. It's لها معاني. But it's marfu', so it will be ma'aniyun. It's too heavy. Correct. لها معان. So the plural of ma'na is ma'ani. When you put it in rafa, you lose the ya. Okay? لها معان. Because of the tanween and the ya. لها معانيun. معاني. One of the tricks was if you're not sure how to use this kind of dropping la, just put it with something else, right? لها معاني. It has many meanings. منها الابتداء. منها الابتداء. From them is beginning, but the min has other meanings of the beginning, right? نحو سافرت من القاهرة. I traveled from Cairo, right? But has many other meanings as well. Amongst them is tab'ir, is when it's partitive. وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ, right? And from the night, right? الحديث فاستعينوا بالغدوة والروحة وشيء من الدلجة, and something from the night. But this min is للتبعير, أي بعضا منها, some part of it. Okay. ومن الليل ف yeah. Right. And from the night glorify him, right? Yeah. Meaning in some part of it. That's very common. Right. وطائفة من الذين معك, a group from the people with you. So a very common secondary meaning is تبعير, partitive. That's a partitive من التبعيضية. But the primary meaning is ابتداء. وإلى, and literally to, ومن معانيها الانتهاء, and from its meanings are the ending. نحو سافرت إلى الإسكندرية. Right? I traveled to Iskandariya, which is an Arabized name. Okay. So you have Iskandariya, so the person who's attributed to it is called al-Iskandari or al-Sikandari. So you have Ibn Ata'illah, some usually say that they call the person ascribed to it is called al-Sikandari or al-Sakandari or al-Iskandari. Or some go even fancy, al-Iskandarani. That's like, because it's an Arabized word. An Arabized word sometimes there's multiple Arabizations. When you see that with number from Nishapur, for example, it's a Naysabur or a Naysabur or Nisabur or Nisabur. Okay? So they Arabize it in multiple ways. Gaylan. Gaylan. So that's why from that you have al-Kaylani. You also have al-Kilani. You have al-Gaylani. Al-Gilani. Or al-Jilani. Or al-Jaylani. So which one is correct? Well, is Gaylan. The place is Gaylan. Or whatever it is in Farsi. And there's a whole slew of Arabic. It could be with the ta, rare, or the kaf, or the jim. Or try to introduce the al-kaf al-Farisiyya or whatever they call it, al-jim al-Farisiyya. So Gayla, kaf, double-headed kaf. Okay? There are multiple Arabizations. Many foreign words have that. Okay, إلى الإسكندرية وعن ومن معانيها المجاوزة, to go beyond. Right? نحو رميت السهم عن القوس. I cast the arrow from the bow. وعلى ومن معانيها الاستعلاء, and على above, meaning has the meaning of استعلاء, of being above. This is an example. استعلى. Right? This is the istaf'ala pattern, but not with the meaning of talab, but of husul. Ista'la, ay talaba al-uluwa wa hasala, fahassala. He attained. Isti'la is to seek to be above or to be above. Right? And sometimes contextually it could indicate one or the other. You have to have a sense like istaqbala al-qibla. Is it he sought to face the Qibla or he faced the Qibla? So he faced the Qibla upon seeking. But actually the fuqaha would say not necessarily. Because if you just happen to face the right Qibla, did you have to seek to face it? No, you don't have to seek to face the Qibla. Presumably you do. There's 75% chance if you didn't try to face the Qibla, that you didn't pray correctly. But if Yasir's so some other Anas, not the Anas that traveled, but another Anas reached Istanbul. same day as our Anas reaches. And he reaches his room, no thought. He just says Allah. At the end of the prayer, if he ended up facing the Qibla, is the prayer valid? Yes, you should know it. We covered. Like if you من صلى بلا تحرر لا تصح صلاته إلا إن تبين أنها كانت للجهة. لأن الأصل عدم الاستقبال. Whoever prays without attempting to face the Qibla, there's 4 scenarios only in multiple scenarios. But the only scenario in which it will be valid is after the prayer if you discovered that you were facing the Qibla. If you ended the prayer and you still don't know if it's the Qibla, what happens? Prayer wasn't valid. If you never found out, is it valid? No. If you found out that it was not the Qibla, it's not valid. So the only scenario that's valid, which is if you discover after the prayer. And there's the fiqh of that, you should check. Anyways. نحو صعدت على الجبل. I went upon the mountain. وفي ومن معانيها الظرفية. ظرفية is for one thing to be contained by another. نحو الماء في الكوز. The water is in, meaning is contained by the kuz, the cup of the vessel. ورب ومن معانيها التقليل. And from the meanings of rubba is taqleel. And what is the primary meaning of rubba? There's discussion on. نحو رب رجل كريم قبلني. And it may be that a noble person will come face to face with me, will meet me. والباء ومن معانيها التعدية is to make one is to make what you call that is to extend the meaning of something to another. And marartu bil wadi, I passed by the wadi. Right? From that, the fi'l muta'addi is that which takes a maf'ul. Right? Many things يتعدى بالباء. Okay? مررت, you can't say مررت واديا, say مررت بالوادي. Right? So something are متعد بنفسه, that's a fi'l muta'addi. Other فعال require an instrument, commonly a باء. والكاف, and the kaf ومن معانيها التشبيه. From the meaning of the kaf is تشبيه, or similitude. نحو ليلة كالبدر. And Layla is like a full moon. Majnoon will not agree with that. Right? Right? Because the moon wanes and sets. Right? It's like the poet said, يعني فإن شمس النهار تغرب ليلا وشموس الحبيب ليست تغيب. Right? 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 For the sun of the day sets by night, وشموس الحبيب, and the sons of the beloved never set. Right? فإذا ما جن الظلام فإلى ربها تحن القلوب. So when the darkness sets in, to their Lord, the heart, to the hearts of lovers ever yearn. Layla kal-badr. Layla is like the Badr. The kaf is used for tashbih, for comparison. Wal-lam, right? And the lam, ومن معانيها الملك. And from the meanings of the lam is ownership. Al-mal li Muhammad. Right? The wealth is Muhammad, meaning belongs to Muhammad. The lam of milk. Also, the lam has other meanings. We'll see some of them as we, later. Right? والاختصاص, he mentions الملك والاختصاص والاستحقاق. Here he mentions 3 meanings. والاختصاص الباب للدار. This door is to the house, meaning it's unique to the house. You won't enter someone else's house through this door. And some only classifies them as 2, right? وَالْحَصِيرُ لِلْمَسْجِدِ. This carpet is the masjid's. They say this is a subset of lam al-milk. Right? So are there two types of primary lam or three? The grammarians differ. You can see the difference in this place here. But for facilitation, there's three. وَالِاسْتِحْقَاقِ is one thing of A being deserved by B. Alhamdu lillahi. Praise is Allah's, meaning is deserved by Allah. Okay? Istihqaq, istahaqqa, to be deserving of. Right? ومن حروف في الخفض حروف القسم. ومن حروف الخفض حروف القسم وهي ثلاثة أحرف. And there are three letters. الأول الواو. وهي لا تدخل إلا على الاسم الظاهر. They don't come enter except an explicit اسم نحو والله. Right? ونحو والطور والطور وكتاب مستور. And this is also Allah swears by the Tur, by the mount, وكتاب مستور, and the recorded book. ونحو والتين والزيتون. Allah swears by the teen and He swears by the zaytun. Right? وطور سينين, and by Mount Sinai. Or by Turi Sinin. Is Turi Sinin Mount Sinai? That's a separate matter. Right? You could find what you can see of it. وثاني الباء. So it comes on the ism al-Zahir, meaning not the ism al-Mudmar. You can't say we, wahi. Waka. Right? It enters in the ism al-Zahir, i.e. not upon the dhamir. But it enters, it can at least in the language, you can swear in the Arabic itself. Now the permissible, you cannot swear by other than Allah. Allah can swear by whatever he wants. It's all His. It's either Him or His. Right? But like someone comes, like someone brought snacks, right? And someone says, "Is this yours?" You say, "What teeny was zaytun? It's mine." Right? You can't swear by the teen and the zaytun, even if they're in your hand. Right? By the fig and the olive. You can't swear by it. Allah can swear by anything of His creation, right? Right? You can. And He said, وَالْقَلَمِ هَذَا الْكِتَابُ لِي. Because Allah swore by it, you can't. It's not. You're not the Lord of the qalam, right? So it can be used in the language only for the ism zahir. They can be used for the divine name, and other names. Right? الباء وثاني الباء ولا تختص بلفظ دون لفظ. The باء is not specific to any type of letter. بل تدخل على الاسم الظاهر. It comes upon an ism ظاهر نحو بالله لأجتهدن. By Allah, I will indeed strive. وعلى الضمير. Right? Someone swore bika. Now bika, you can use it for the ba, that it enters upon the instrument. But for example, مسحت الطاولة بيدي. مسحت بيدي. Right? But here bika لأضربن الكسول. Someone swore by Allah. Bika ya Rab لأضربن الكسول. By you, O Lord, I will hit the lazy student. Right? I won't. I'm just reading the example. Right? So this enters the ism al-Zahir and the ism and the dhamir. But والثالث التاء. And ولا تدخل إلا على لفظ الجلالة. It only enters upon the divine name, لفظ الجلالة, the divine name of majesty. نحو from the Quran, وَتَاللَّهِ لَأَكِيدَنَّ أَصْنَامَكُمْ. By Allah, but you can't say Tar-Rahman. Right? The Arabs would swear by the Kaaba. We can't do that. We can say وَرَبِّ الْكَعْبَةِ. But the majority of opinion is you can. Right? and there's some legal issues associated with it. Some people like throwing things that are calling a bunch of things shirk. It's an error, but the Arabs also, so, you know, the simple way, whether it's correct or not is one thing. Calling something shirk is a very serious thing, right? And that's, you know, and the way some expressions of some of the people who, for example, say, someone says, وَالنَّبِي, meaning وَرَبِّ النَّبِي, على حذف المضاف, which is very common usage, right? It's similar to say, shouldn't have said that, but this is how we deem it to be correct, but please don't use it again, right? Rather than deeming something shirk, that's a big thing. It's calling something shirk. No one does something shirk, what are they? They're mushrik. Now if you hold yourself, if you mean what you say, then are you saying his wife has to leave him? And he's been saying that from before he got married, so his kids are awlad zina, you cannot transact with him, you cannot go to his house, eat his food. No, I don't mean all that. Then don't say, no, don't accuse it of shirk, right? So what some ulama do, say no. There's one thing to say A is shirk, but then can you apply it to a particular person that you're doing shirk? That's a very different thing. Right? Because some things, for example, we have hadith that العهد بيننا وبينهم مصافى من تركها فقد كفر. قد has indeed committed kufr. So then the confused, so Zubayr, because Zubaydah finally told him, I will not marry you. He got so distraught, he was lost in his anguish, and he didn't pray for a few days. He asked him, can you call him kafir? No, he didn't pray. But according to overwhelming majorities of Islamic scholars, you can't call him kafir. But the hadith says, because yes, that's true, but one, what does it mean? And number two, how does it apply? Right? So, but there's a lot of investigation about the use. But the general rule, but it's not an absolute, you can only swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His names and attributes. Okay? Yeah. It comes up in the Burda. Some people say one of the aspects of imagine shirk in the Burda is what? Oh, because he says, وَاسْمُهُ قَسَمٌ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ الْقَسَمِ. His name is an oath by the greatest oath. He's advocating swearing on, no. Right? No. Okay? Because firstly, مِنْ أَعْظَمِ الْقَسَمِ, because who swears by the Prophet ﷺ? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran swears by the Prophet ﷺ, right? Right? And if you say وَرَبِّ Muhammad, right? And by the Lord Muhammad, like which is, and you know, Sayyid Aisha would swear by frequently by the name of the Prophet, right? So the Prophet told her, I know when you're pleased with me and I know when you're displeased with me. Because if he would be pleased with her, what would she say? When she was pleased with the Prophet, she'd say, by your Lord, right? وَرَبِّ Muhammad. She'd be upset at him, you know, by family disagreement. وَرَبِّ Ibrahim, by the Lord of Ibrahim. Just understand that. Like, you know, so that, take it deeper. Now practically, as students of knowledge, when these kind of confusions happen, what do? Right? There's a simple principle, you know, illustrated in, you know, by Zarruq. The foundational principle of our religion in its qawa'id, that every science has its experts and its authorities. So if you want to know what is the sound understanding of something, refer to the experts in the science, and if the experts differ, look at what the authorities say. Simple. Which Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Shamuni summarized in a guiding principle with respect to our religious life. He said, "Deenuna ma'alayhi a'immatud deen." Our religion is what the imams of the religion are upon. You want to know, okay, what does this line of the Burda mean? Instead of coming in like the elephant in the china shop, just smash everything up. Okay, hold on a second. Take a deep breath. Okay. Great imams or authorities of Islam have written commentaries on the Burda. Let's just say, what does Ibn Hajar al-Haytami say? Commentator on the. What does Mullah Ali al-Qari, one of the greatest scholars of hadith and fiqh? Right? Some of the Hanafis argue that he was the mujaddid at the turn of the 10th, beginning of the 11th Islamic century. Others disagree for other reasons. And but great scholar. And so many others, Imam Ibrahim al-Bajuri said. So people are saying, okay, this hadith means this. Okay. The hadith will comment upon. It's okay, good. Can we agree on this principle? That, let's refer to what are the undenied authority. Let's take it back. Okay. And that is something to keep in mind, right? So he has questions and exercises, and these are useful here. And then he talks about علامات الفعل, right? قال والفعل يعرف بقد وسين بقد والسين وسوف وتاء التأنيث الساكنة. Okay? So we'll continue from here بإذن الله تعالى. And the فعل and the حرف are very straightforward. Of course, there's a spiritual commentary on the al-Ajrumiyya. So by Ibn Ajiba. Ibn Ajiba wrote a commentary on it. At the end, so it says الكلام هو الاسم والفعل والحرف. Right? So the ism is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mention of the name of Allah. فاذكر اسم ربك. That's the allusion. The al-fi'l, the al-kalam, right? Kalam refers to an expression. So those expressions of spiritual concern that count, such that they make you reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are three. Al-ism, which is dhikrul ism, is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاذْكُرْ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا. وَالْفِعْلِ, and action. And what action is it? Is al-mujahada, which is to strive against your lower self. So the dhikr wal-mujahada, the fi'l, which is mujahadatul nafs. They say عجز المشايخ أن يزحزح مريدا لم يجاهد نفسه. The sheikhs have proved incapable of shaking awake a seeker who won't strive against their own lower self. No one can do it for you. Right? You have to follow guidance, but you have to follow it. Wal-harf. And what is the harf? The harf is reliance upon other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Is becoming dependent on the means. And you need the means, you need to take the means to reach Allah, but when you reach Allah, you will drop the means. So drop the means in terms of what? In terms of being reliant upon them. So you drop the means in terms of tarkut tadbir. You're not reliant on yourself and your machinations. You're not reliant on the means. He gives a very simplified explanation from it. And so the fi'l, and he says the fi'l that causes you to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qad. The qad refers to determination. He said jid. Wasin wa sawf ay isqatuhuma. Which is tarkut taswif, is to leave putting things off. So the fi'l, it said the action here refers to the action that causes you to reach Allah. What action causes you to reach Allah? Qad, is determination. Qad aflah al-mu'minun, indeed, right? Is determination. Wasin wa sawfa refers to isqatu sin wa sawfa. You have to put things, so sin and sawfa are for taswif. The tarkut taswif, by leaving sin and sawfa. Are you doing your awrad? Sawfa. سأقرأها غدا. No. Right? Has the time not come? لم يأتن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع. Has the time not come? Right? وتاء التأنيث الساكنة. Right? Which is سكون with Allah. I forget what he meant by that. But he sustains a brilliant Ishari commentary on the whole of thing, because he sees meanings in everything. Right? Rahimahullah ta'ala. But that's a secondary thing. They call these mulah al-ilm. These are interesting points of knowledge, but the focus is on the actual study. So we'll go from the alamat al-fi'l. We ask Allah to grant us clear insight. We talked about a number of related matters for the purpose of clarity and direction. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Could you define the third tanween and tanween al-muqabla?
I could, but you can look it up in Shaykh Ali. Which that tanween is a point of analysis. You could argue that that's just like tanween al-tamkin, but is it that so the Arabs, the grammarians understood that the Arabic language you see a balance. If one thing is given one thing, another would be given another. Right? So the tanween al-muqabala, they give a formal definition. I'll just look it up for you. Tanween. How do they define? So al-Ashmawi, rahimahullah, defines tanween بالخفض والتنوين. التنكير تنوين العوض. الرابع تنوين. Where's the رابع? Yeah. So تنوين المقابلة, like I mentioned the example, I mentioned اللاحق. التنوين المقابلة comes after جمع المؤنث السالم. Right? Because the جمع المذكر السالم got a noon. Right? Got a noon. And they consider the noon to be noble. Now why they consider noon to be noble? That's a big deal. The men got Muslim became Muslimun. The noon is a rich word. The noon elevated the dhamma, right? From like the noon is a big deal. Now they got the noon. Now it would be fit if the Jama al-Mudakkar got a noon. Women didn't get the noon. They just got a flat ta. Right? Now why is the ta not such a big deal? They got two dots. But they didn't consider it such a big deal. Anyway, so this is تنوين المقابلة في it's a تنوين اللاحق لجمع المؤنث السالم في مقابلة النون بجمع المذكر السالم. Right? And that's just because of this idea that there is there's a muqabala between things. There's generally things. So if you give this to one person, you give the other that which is equitable. And why? Because that's how the Arabs generally did it. There's a consistency in it. That's if the Arabs did it. Right? Where does Arabic come from? That's a separate matter. Where does Arabic come from? And what's the relationship between Arabic and the idea that Arabic is a language of paradise? Is that only in the future? Is Arabic the Adamic language? We don't know. But there are those who would argue that the primordial language is Arabic. Or there's a high Arabic. That's the al-Lughat, haqiqatan. And then from that, other languages were derived. And what was done by Sayyidina Ismail and others was a return to the original language. Is that the case? Allahu A'lam. Yeah, this is one of the discussions that people like. Was one of the coolest names in grammar. Ibn al-Jinni discusses that in his Khasa'is, or Ibn Jinni. There's Ibn Jinni and there's Ibn Malik. One's a grammarian, one's a Hanafi scholar. Right? Because his father or grandfather's name was Farishta, which means Malak which means angel in Farsi. Farishta, they call him Ibn Malik. And by others. Imam Suyuti has worked on al-Ikhtirah fi usul al-Nahu, on some of these foundational discussion of Nahu. So he discusses these things. But ultimately, there's one theoretically what's the root of Arabic, and then practically where do words come from? Is it because of sounds? So difda makes it sound tuf, whatever sound is difda, I can't copy it. Difda. Sarsoor is called sarsoor because makes the scuttling sound. The dub, because the way it steps on the ground, etc. So some words for sure. Others, so what's the process of giving meanings to words? What's the process of setting the forms of words? And then of course, there's a classical linguistics of it, and there's also what you can call pop linguistics. People say, oh, the sad, because the Arabs used to plow, and the plow looked at like the sad. There's some self-taught people on Facebook. I keep getting sent these kinds of things every few months. I haven't known because when people would claim something strange, the people ask, هل لك فيه سلف? Has anyone said this before? Who is an authority who has affirmed it? Are you an authority? No. Has an authority affirmed it? No. Okay, it's your theory. Ma'as-salam. If it's important, I'll go take that. If I'm interested, I'll take that and go and see what do the authorities of the Arabic language say about it. If they agree upon that that's the right answer, then multiple answers. Sometimes it doesn't matter to us. Where does the word sad come from? Do I really need to know that right now? No. Curious. But don't believe these things because often, there's curious things online, the marvels of the Arabic language. But it's good to ask us, what is this based on? Because a lot of times people, for the purpose of curiosity, and they just, literally, I've seen people prepare, they kind of Google, what do I find? The theory that the letters are from the different things used by the Arabs, that's part of their farming, and where did the Arabs farm? And they were desert people. Right? So there's all kinds of far-fetched ideas. Don't pay attention to them.
Also, I was hoping to define التقليل from والرب ومن والرب ومن معانيها التقليل.
Diminishment. Right? Rubba is used for taqleel and sometimes it's used for takthir. There's criteria for A and B. Okay.
What was Ashmawi's commentary called?
This is Sharh al-Ajrumiyya. There are two editions. There's one with the text on top and the commentary, the hashiyah below. It's hashiyah al-Ajrumiyya, it's not Sharh al-Ajrumiyya. It's a hashiyah. It's not word by, it's not interlineal, but it's bil-qawl. Qawluhu kaza, qawluhu kaza. It's technical, but there are particular points that are very beneficial. Like, two things that I've suggested to you. You could compile them, it's worth writing out. You can even do it by hand. One was the breakdown of Ism, Fi'l, and Harf, the 5 investigations related to each. The other is the 4 types of tanween. I mentioned them in brief, but you can find them there.
Why doesn't the commentator go on to define the definite article? All he says is it comes in the beginning of words, but he doesn't go on to talk about definiteness, for example.
Because those are concepts that require, it's beyond the need of the section. Right? You can't really go into everything, right? But to define what is definite, you have to then go into defining what's the indefinite, and then it takes you away, and that comes in its due place, right? Al-ma'rifa wa nakira comes up later. Right? It just leaves it for that. Its presence it's an outward sign. If you see the L before a word, you can assume that it's definite. It is. Right? But they've struggled with it. You want to put the L that is زائدة to make it different from like الذي or الواح. الواح has a low, the broken, many broken plurals. Right? Al-sun. It's not al-sun. It's al-sun is a broken plural of lisan. Al-sun. Al-sina or al-sun. So that's, there's something that are tricky to do. Right? It opens up a can of worms and it distracts from the primary purpose. So Shaykh Faraz is very, he's a master. Like this is not demonstrative of Shaykh Hamid's standing in the Arabic language per se. You want to see his mastery of the Arabic language, look at his work on the commentaries of the al-Fiyya, Sharh, Ibn Hisham. Look at his critical edition of Muhyiddin Labib of Ibn Hisham, and you get a sense. Oh, it's a big deal. He knows what he's talking about. Here you see the mastery not by the complexity of what he does, but by his being an educator, that he knows what to mention and what not to mention. And many things he mentions by indication. Like we saw the definition of alama. He mentioned, does he define alama? Right? Indirect, right? Dilalatan. Right? By indication, or